Welcome to the Man Cave Podcast with Dan Casper.
Let's talk some more Brewers and Bucks, though, with our guest, Mr. JR Radcliffe, who is the host of the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel Brewers podcast called the Micro Brew Podcast and the Milwaukee Bucks Point Forward podcast. JR, appreciate you making us or joining us this morning and talking a little Brewers and Bucks with us again.
Yeah, anytime, no problem.
Hey, I want to start off a little bit with the Bucks, because the Bucks can clinch that fifth seed with a win tonight, which potentially it kind of looks like another playoff series with the Pacers looms. So, what's your initial sense on a potential Bucks and Pacers playoff series if we get to see that again this year?
I feel pretty good about that. I don't know how far you can take in terms of just like mentality of getting to play them a second time in a row after such a disappointment the year before, but I really feel like they're going to be galvanized for a matchup again where they're not the home seed, where they're not the higher seed, so they have to go to Indiana. They have to play Tyrese Halliburton. It ended so badly for them last year. Giannis is playing at such a high level right now. I feel like that's pretty decent, and I do feel like the way when they played in the regular season, the Bucks have won 3 of those 4 matchups, and the fourth one comes down to a crazy buzzer beater by Halliburton. Obviously they've shown well. I think Giannis can get kind of whatever he wants. Now that doesn't mean that they're going to win games or win the series, but Giannis is going to cook against that team. Mm-hmm. And then it's just a matter of other guys stepping up and filling the void. Obviously, not having Damian Lillard makes it tough, but I feel really, really strong about that, and the whole playoff map in general, if it ends this way, because to go to the Pacers and then have to play the 1-seed Cavaliers, I think Cleveland is a little more vulnerable in a matchup with the Bucks than maybe the Celtics or Knicks would be. I would pick Cleveland like anybody else if I had to, if that became a matchup. But especially if they can somehow get Lillard back, I think they could probably give Cleveland some fits. I wouldn't want that matchup if I were the Cavaliers. I know that. So I feel strong that they're in okay shape, as good a shape as they can be without one of their best players. Obviously, there've been some rumblings that Damian Lillard can be back. I'm skeptical. I'm not sure that's true. I feel like they really probably won't have him, or at least not a full version of him for any of the postseason here. But things I think are looking up. It's not a guarantee, because the Knicks are resting a bunch of people tonight. That means Pistons will probably win, and if the Pistons do win, it means the Bucks have to win one of these last 2 games. That's not a guarantee, but I would still feel pretty good as a Bucks follower that's going to work out for them.
You kind of mentioned Dame, and I know you and Jim Lazarski recently discussed this in your latest podcast, the Milwaukee Bucks Point Forward podcast. But do you think it's possible we might see Damian Lillard? Or are you kind of skeptical? Like, I'm kind of skeptical too, because blood clots that's not something you can kind of really forecast, right?
Right. This is just an impossible thing. It's not like, he's got a calf issue like it was last year with Giannis, and it ended up that Giannis was unavailable to play and wouldn't have been able to play for a long time. But at least you can sort of forecast, okay, well, he's doing a few more team activities, or he's in practice now, so you can see the process. You could see him being maybe 50% or 80%, but you just don't have any of that benefit with something like a blood clot. He's going to be available when doctors say, okay, you can get going, and then he's going to have to get in all the reps that are necessary for somebody who hasn't been able to practice for a few weeks. So, first of all, I don't think there's any likelihood of getting at 100% Damian Lillard. You might be able to get a guy who's, still building up conditioning or whatever, and that might be good enough to hit a few shots or whatever, but you're not getting a full-fledged Damian Lillard. The Bucks will be facing that. When the story is written, they will not have had everything that they thought they could have in a postseason series. But I don't know. I just, it's one of those things where until he's actually practicing, and Jim said this on the podcast, he's doing, light work on the side, or there's reports that, maybe he can get back to practice. Like, okay, there's going to be that stuff. But until he is actually practicing, I think it is just something you have to assume he's just not going to be available. So I know that's hard to come to terms with, but I just don't see how he's going to be back.
Speaking of being back, we saw Bobby Portis return the other night, and a double-double performance from him. I'm curious to see how Doc Rivers does that rotation now to get Bobby Portis minutes with Kyle Kuzma and such, because we really haven't seen Portis and Kuzma together a whole lot since Kuzma's come over in that trade, right?
Yeah, virtually nothing there with the suspension kicking in right after the trade deadline.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't seen that. I'm curious if it means Brook Lopez can finally cut back on his workload, because that dude has been putting in miles and miles on his 37-year-old body. It should do, it certainly helps. It certainly helps. It brings some juice. We know what Bobby Portis can do for this team emotionally. We saw it in this first game back against Minnesota. It was one of the more electric environments that you're going to have at Pfizer Forum for a regular season game, especially one this late in the season where destiny is kind of figured out by now. It's certainly great to get him back. I wouldn't look at that and say, oh, that's an additive that's going to take the Bucks from being, maybe they can win a first round series to, oh, I really think they can win it. I don't think Bobby Portis is the difference in that, but yeah, it'll be interesting. And maybe there is something that unlocks Kyle Kuzma, because offensively he has just been so rough. And maybe having Bobby Portis available is either because it changes the rotation, or they can work together and you can get Kyle Kuzma somehow freed up, more confident. I don't know what it is, but right now he's only contributing defensively. He's not doing anything for you offensively, and that is ultimately hurting this team. He's got to somehow shoot better than 28% or 29%, whatever it is, from 3-point range. I don't know if Bobby Portis does anything there, but maybe it unlocks something that finally gets Kuzma going, because they will 100% need him to be better than he has been in the regular season if they're going to advance.
JR Radcliffe joining us here this morning, talking some Brewers and Bucks here. Just one more Bucks question before we ask you a couple Brewers ones. But, I mean, recently in the NBA in the last couple of weeks, we've seen a couple of playoff teams fire their head coaches. The Bucks over the past couple of years have been doing that. Adrian Griffin, Mike Budenholzer, now Doc Rivers here. Do you feel like with how this season has gone, do you feel like Doc is going to be on the hot seat, or he needs to have a deep postseason run to maybe keep his job for next season?
Yeah, so Jim and I discussed this too on the last Point Forward podcast, and I guess, is he on the hot seat? You have to say yes, if only because that's just how the NBA is operating. You just mentioned Michael Malone getting fired 2 years after winning a title when the Nuggets are still a perfectly viable team feels insane. They have a ton of behind-the-scenes drama that's well documented, so it might be a little bit of an extenuating circumstance, but it is certainly part of a trend. Frank Vogel, Nick Nurse, Mike Budenholzer, all these guys won titles, and then they were gone within pretty short order. So I think every coach, who isn't Steve Kerr or Greg Popovich or Eric Spoelstra, I think every coach that isn't one of those guys is on the hot seat to some degree, and it hasn't been great with the Bucks. Now you can point to a ton of extenuating circumstances. Getting hired mid-season and trying to figure out a team that's still trying to figure out its new superstar and making that all work. That's a tall task. And then you had injuries in year two to some degree, but I think if you wanted to say the Bucks need a different direction and different coach, I think that'd be justified. If you wanted to say I think the Bucks could probably still make Doc Rivers work, maybe, yeah, that seems like it's possible. I couldn't give a strong endorsement either way. I really don't know if I have enough data to say yet that I think Doc Rivers is 100% the problem. I know that it hasn't looked as smooth as I'm sure by now Bucks fans hoped it would look with Damian Lillard joining the fray. It just doesn't feel like that's at full speed, full capacity even before he got hurt. So I don't know if that's something you lay at the feet of Rivers or not. I don't think they're going to move on. I don't get the sense that that's going to happen or likely to happen, at least before the next season. I feel like they're going to give him at least the start of another full season before they make any choices. They're already paying 2 other head coaches at this point, with the rapid fire that they've had. So I don't think they're going to bring in a third yet. But I don't know. It blows my mind that Taylor Jenkins and Michael Malone have been fired in the last few weeks. That blows my mind. So honestly, nothing is safe in the NBA.
Because you mentioned Jenkins, and he is a former Bucks assistant coach too. And I thought Giannis had spoke highly of him, a couple of years ago too. So my mind's went. I'm like, oh, he's available now. If there's something, could he be a possibility? But who knows? I mean, it's kind of a wild west. It seems like when it comes to head coaching landscape.
I think he'll be in pretty high demand. I don't know if I don't know which teams are necessarily going to have openings or not, but Taylor Jenkins will not be out of work for long. So if the Bucks are interested, they should bring him in soon.
Yeah.
A lot of teams are going to want him.
Absolutely. Hey, a couple Brewers questions for you. I mean, we are now 2 weeks into the season. 2 weeks ago today, it was opening day, and obviously we know what happened in the first 4 games of the season. Now the Brewers have really just kind of turned it around and won 7 of their last 8. But what has been your initial thoughts on this team 2 weeks into the season so far?
If you had told me I'd wake up on April 10th and they'd be within 1 run of an even run differential, I don't know what I would have said. Like, after those first 4 games, they look so terrible, and then they have bounced back. You can caveat everything this early in the season. Well, they lost those 3 games, but they were playing the Yankees, and the Yankees are good. Now, the Yankees haven't been awesome since then, but good offense. They're kicking butt now, but there's these 2 games against the Rockies. The Rockies are lousy, and it's in Coors Field. Also true. Like, I don't know. I mean, I think it's pretty impressive they haven't given up a ton of runs in Coors Field.
Mm-hmm.
So until we can get through some of these caveats, it's really hard to get a good sense. I still feel like they're pitching. This is how I felt at the beginning of the year. Their pitching just worries me, and it's certainly, it's certainly overcoming the fact that everybody has been injured in the starting rotation. I mean, they've done what they can. I think Tyler Alexander has looked really good. The numbers kind of speak for themselves, but last night, he was dotting those pitches. I mean, he looks really good. I don't know if he's like a long-term starter option, but they could do worse than what they've done, trying to fill some gaps. Let's say everybody's healthy. I don't know if I love the rotation. But if Tobias Myers is anything approaching what he was last year, Jose Quintana, I imagine, are going to get a look at him sometime this weekend, probably tomorrow right away. If Brandon Woodruff comes back in May and is like actually Brandon Woodruff, now you can start talking me into, okay, this pitching is actually pretty good. If it stays healthy, which is a major if, and the offense is coming around. I'm worried about Rhys Hoskins. I was last year, and I thought maybe after the strong spring he would look pretty good coming out of the gate this year. That has not been the case. But I was also worried about Christian Yelich 4 days ago, and now I feel a lot less worried about that after he's been rifling balls at 100 miles an hour off his bat left and right, including a couple bombs at Coors Field. So it just doesn't take much for me to change my mind, I guess. I feel like a windsock, but I'm still learning about this team. I'm still not crazy about the pitching situation, even if things do get a little bit healthier. But have to acknowledge they've once again, at least to this point of the season, figured out a way to patchwork through it. And now guys are going to start getting healthy, so they're going to have a lot more options.
Offensively, obviously Jackson Chourio and what he's doing. He's on an 11-game hitting streak after getting 5 Ks on opening day. But Bryce Terang, man, I mean, hitting streak every single game, and he's gone up against a lot of left-handed pitchers too, and that was kind of his downfall when he first made his debut a couple years ago. Has he been the most impressive offensive player that you've seen so far in these first 2 weeks of the season?
I mean, yes. Like, I would say Chourio, what Chourio has done is also very, very impressive and very reassuring, since this is, you see that first game and you think, oh, they've adjusted to him. They can strike him out 5 times in a game, and then no, just kidding. He's adjusting to you, and now he's going to pound the ball around the park for the rest of this first part of the season. But Terang is huge. The knock on Bryce, even when he was really strong at the beginning of last year, is that he just doesn't hit the ball very hard. It doesn't do much damage. He was relying on just good placement wherever he was hitting the ball. He was getting lucky. I don't know if it's like, that's probably too strong. There's more to it, but he was getting some good fortune last year when things were going really well. I would not say that's the case this year. I would say that he's just pounding the baseball. I mean, the 440-foot homer is truly something I didn't think he was capable of, but that's that's even an outlier. He's just hitting the ball all over the park and hard, and that is almost always correlating with more damage, more doubles, more opportunities to drive in runs, and just like, I mean, I think it's possible he is a much better hitter than he was last year, or a much better hitter than he's been to this point in his career. He's not a very complicated, he's not going to give you a complicated explanation for what's going on. We don't know that he's done anything dramatically different. There's a slight variation in his batting stance, but for the most part, it's still him, and he's just like, yeah, I don't know, I'm older, I guess, I'm stronger. It's just, okay, maybe that's all it is, but he's clearly, there is something to this, and it might tail off like it did last year. I'm hesitant because of last year, because he was so rough in the second half, to say, wow, he's a changed man, and he's like an all-star caliber hitter now, in addition to his all-star caliber defense. But really, really promising, And obviously, if you get the big boppers going like Yelich and Contreras have kind of started getting going, now you're talking about an actual like pretty strong offense.
Last question before I let you go here, JR. You mentioned some of the pitchers, but of the guys who have yet to make their debut this season, Quintana, Woodruff, Tobias, even Aaron Ashby or DL Hall, if you had to pick one, which one do you think would have the biggest impact for the ball club this season?
It's Woodruff, right? Like if he is himself, and I mean, how fascinating is it to see after a year and almost a year and a half of being sidelined, if he comes back and looks good, like I think we'll probably know early on. Shoulder injuries are so complicated, and there's such a wide range of outcomes. I think Brewers fans remember Jimmy Nelson a couple years ago, how he came back and he just could not do anything. He could not locate, could not throw as hard as he used to, and it just, unfortunately, it was just over for him. Is that the case for Woodruff, or is Brandon Woodruff, all-star pitcher, still available to them? Everything changes if you've got a good Brandon Woodruff to go with Freddie Peralta. Everybody else can just slide in right behind there, and now you're talking about again a really good pitching rotation. So that's the guy that I'm most interested in. I think Quintana is a curiosity because he's never pitched for the Brewers before. Always been, unfortunately, the guy pitching against them and kicking their butts. But you kind of know what you're going to get there. It's going to be solid but unspectacular. Tobias Myers, I think, is solid. Unspectacular is unfair to him after that first season, but I think everyone thought that was probably the best case scenario, and it probably won't be quite that good this year. But Brandon Woodruff is a major wild card. He could be anything from unpitchable to that dude who pitches game one of a playoff series. So that's definitely something I'm curious to see.
He's JR Radcliffe, host of the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel Brewers podcast called the Micro Brew Podcast and the Milwaukee Bucks Point Forward podcast. Go check it out. Follow, subscribe to both those podcasts. JR does a fantastic job with a boatload of guests on there. JR, big thanks for joining us here in the Chippewa Valley this morning. Always love chatting with you and would love to do this again in the future, man.
All right, sounds good. Have a great day. Have a good weekend.